Bill Boria, Water Resource Specialist, Chautauqua County Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Environmental Health. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Gould. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. My background is in geophysics, geology, engineering, and water resources. We have a long tradition here in Chautauqua County of gas well drilling. The first gas well in the nation to be used commercially was drilled in Fredonia. It was only 27 feet deep, and which goes to show you that there's a lot of shallow gas around here. Let's look at the gas wells. There's over 3,500 active gas wells in Chautauqua County. You see from the production, half the gas wells in the state are located in Chautauqua County, so 50% of the gas wells in New York State are in our county, yet they only produce about 20% of the natural gas in the state. So they're fairly low producing. Some other counties have much fewer gas wells that are much higher producing, such as Chemung County, which is this little guy down here. I'm going to look at the potential impacts on water resources from drilling. And I'm looking, not just at horizontal drilling and high volume hydrofracking, but also at traditional vertical drilling. Here's a list. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but you could spend 20 minutes on this alone. So we're worried about spills, storage and handling of drilling mud, erosion and sediment control from construction, dewatering streams, as Kim mentioned, flowback water management, wastewater management, migration of brine, methane and frack fluid into groundwater, into shallow groundwater or drinking water, and then production water management, or the fluid that comes out of the well during the life of the well and has to be disposed of. I'm going to talk about just two of these. The first thing I'm going to look at is the health department has responded to a number of complaints over the years, starting in the early 80s. Actually, 142 documented complaints. And we went out and investigated each one of these. We collected, at 133 of them, we collected water samples and had them analyzed for something. Most of those were in the 1980s. Approximately exactly 113 of them in the 1980s. We had 5 in the 1990s. Gas well drilling dried up to some extent in the 90s, and then it resurfaced in the 2000s. So we're back to having a couple dozen in the 2000s and recently. Of all of those that we've investigated, 21 we could say were linked to oil and gas well activity. 11 of them we're not too sure about. We needed more information to make that determination. But for the most part, if you look at how many wells there are in the county, 5,000 wells, 142 complaints, maybe 30 or so that could be related, that are related to oil and gas well activity. It's a pretty good track record, 2 to 3%. So I want to give you two case studies of examples of when gas well drilling did impact water wells. First one is methane migration into drinking water wells, and this dates back to 1983, 82 and 83 in Levant. We had a dozen homes who all of a sudden their water wells became contaminated with methane. In response to that, there was a lot of activity, DEC, USGS, SUNY Fredonia, JCC. Everybody came down to try to figure out where's this gas coming from. And ultimately, they didn't come to a conclusion. The reason being is it's very difficult to get conclusive evidence to show what the cause was. But in the end, everyone figured out that it must be from oil and gas well activity. And this is a typical vertical well that you would find in Chautauqua County, gas well. There's a conductor casing and then a surface casing down to about 450 feet or so, and that is cemented. And then there's the borehole, 6.5-inch borehole, and a 4.5-inch casing goes down to the producing formation. And then there's a gap here between the cement. The cement starts, again, usually above the Onondaga limestone to seal out all of the gas. There's several other gas-producing zones in here, so they want to seal those out. But there is this gap. And before the late 1980s, when this Levant issue happened, these gas wells were not vented to the atmosphere. And one of the things that the DEC did after this Levant issue and after talking to all the experts that came to look at this was, you know what, if we vented this to the atmosphere, this would prevent gas from building up that might be shallow gas, like that 27-foot deep gas in Canada Way or in Fredonia, from migrating into this annulus, into this void space, and then building up pressure, and then finally seeping out at some point, finding a crack or something to seep to shallow groundwater. So this is something that's actually evolved in Chautauqua County. Chautauqua County has helped the industry do this statewide. So all gas wells now have to be vented to the atmosphere. Let's look at something a little bit more recent, methane contamination in the town of Poland. Here's a gas well. There's 3 homes here. And the home that's right here, this is about 1,200, 1,300 feet. Home right here, their well became contaminated with methane shortly after drilling this gas well. The place across the street, that got contaminated as well. Interestingly enough, this guy who's closest, he didn't have any contamination. And these wells are actually drilled into rock. So they're collecting water, the water wells, they're collecting water from the top of the rock or from cracks in the rock. That's important. And this is what we think happened there. Well, we know this is what happened there because I've talked to the drilling company. There was defective casing. There were 2 holes in the casing that were identified, one at about 2,000 feet, one at about 2,800 feet. And what happened is the gas was able to migrate out of those holes into the void where it's not cemented, find a crack or a bedding plane or something, migrate along the bedding plane, and eventually reach a couple water wells. Let's look at brine migration into drinking water wells. Again, I've got a case study right here in the county. This is a recently drilled gas well using the air rotary method. This is a pit that collects the cuttings and slurry during the drilling process. This is not the same well site. This is a different well site. This is mud rotary. This is what's called a mud pit, and water or mud is circulated into the pit and then through the hole, back down the hole, brings up the cuttings. And at the end of the drilling process and the end of the production, this liquid is pumped out and it's wastewater taken, disposed of properly at a wastewater facility, or injected underground. The liners that are then, after this is emptied, the liners are shredded and the bulldozer used to cover the cuttings in the pit and reclaim it. And you'd never know it was there once that gets all done, the earth gets stabilized. But what is left is some residual contamination in the drill cuttings. This is in town of Kyantone, and it was these people had a home that they built in about 1990. They drilled the well about the same time. There was a gas well came in, was drilled about 330 feet away, and shortly after that, actually it was close to a year after that, they noticed a salty taste in their water. And they called me, they called the gas company, what have you. We went out and investigated. And I put together the site map. There's a septic system. This is down gradient from the house. The well's up gradient, the way things should be. And this well is up gradient as well. After they had the salty taste, they retested. And as you can see, several contaminants, total dissolved solids, chlorides, barium and methane to some extent increased, sulfate decreased, and this is kind of a signature of brine chemistry. This graphic is from a person named Harrison, who actually taught at Allegheny College, and he was involved in the Levant study. He's a hydrogeologist, and shortly after the Levant study, he published this paper in the Journal of Groundwater, and it very accurately depicts what happened at that site I just described. Here's the mud pit from the gas well drilling operation, and the geology at that person's home was such that bedrock was only about 15 feet below the ground surface. So you've got a mud pit that's probably 8 feet deep. It's not very far from the bottom of the pit to the top of the rock, and a rock aquifer like that, there's generally the water, a lot of water is available on top of the rock and feeds a water well that's drilled into rock. And what probably happened is contaminants from the mud pit flowed along the top of the rock, got into their water well, and turned their water slightly salty, increased in barium and what have you. And this shows kind of I mean, this is almost exactly what happened, except the slope isn't quite the same. Here's the mud pit, down gradient to a water well. So that's probably what happened there. And this kind of depicts this from the same author, from Harrison. This depicts the two processes I just talked about. Here's a gas well. You see some shallow gas-bearing zone here getting into this uncemented annulus of the well, finding its way out, finding its way to a water well. And then here's the mud pit, the thing that we just described. Now, we have an arrangement with DEC when we investigate a water well complaint. We go out, and if it has merit, we refer it to DEC. And unfortunately, we don't have the best relationship with Division of Minerals. We do with all the other departments in DEC, but Division of Minerals, not so good. We refer them to DEC, they come out, knock on the door. We've recommended, hey, listen, this place in Kyantone, there's I mean, it's obviously, we really think it's a mud pit that contaminated this person's well. We'd like you to go out, drill some test wells, some monitoring wells, do some sampling, maybe do some geophysics, determine exactly where that mud pit is, and do a little bit of invasive investigation. They've refused to do that. But I got to say that in this SGIS, Supplemental Generic Environmental Impact Statement, they have included some of the recommendations and some of our comments directly in that SGIS. So I think we've gotten their ear. Some of the mitigation measures in the SGIS, again, there's a whole list here. Kim went over a bunch of them. It would take 20 minutes for me to go over these itself, but we're just going to talk about a couple of them. The first four: separation distances between well pads, private water well monitoring, well pad construction standards, and some of the drilling procedures that deal with mud pits. So let's look at well construction. Here's our friend, the old vertical gas well with the annulus. It's not completely cemented. For a horizontal well, the annulus is cemented all the way to the end of the well bore. And in addition to that, the well drillers are required to run a grout integrity log down that well to make sure that there are no voids in that grout, in that cement, where anything could seep out. Let's look at well pad drilling fluid handling. There are two options in this environmental impact statement to handle drilling fluids. One of them is in a lined pit if the drilling fluid is not polymer or petroleum-based, and the other one is in a closed loop system where they don't have any pits, everything's contained in a tank. So I guess, I think Mike Hogan's going to talk about this a little bit more, but the industry is moving to this. And then again, same with drill cuttings. They've got to be contained instead of in a pit. and hauled off to a landfill. Separation distances, they're greatly increased for this type of drilling, for horizontal drilling and high volume hydraulic fracturing. That's all I'm going to say because I don't want to take up too much time here. Water quality testing of private wells. And, previously, this has not been required in New York State, but a lot of the well drillers take it on their own initiative to do it because it protects them and it gives the people around the well, the residents around the well that's being drilled, some comfort in knowing the water well was tested. But in the horizontal drilling approach and in the environmental impact statement that's proposed, there will be required testing within 1,000 feet. If there's no private wells, drinking water wells within 1,000 feet, they'll go out to 2,000 feet and test it for things that are indicative of both hydraulic fracturing fluid and brine or salt water that's natural water at depth. Local health departments are cited in the environmental impact statement as being the first responders to water well complaints. And we expect there to be a lot of complaints before a drilling bit even hits the ground. I mean, we're going to be busy. When I say we, I mean me and my counterparts in other counties that work for health departments. One of the things we need, because that's in there, it's written into the environmental impact statement, we need state allocated money to directly to health departments and the resources to do this job. And if they don't give it to us, then it's another unfunded mandate by the state. But yet we're going to be involved no matter what. The Western Pennsylvania, in the 13 county area, Pennsylvania, the Department of Environmental Protection added 15 staff members to their staff that do nothing but address water well complaints and other complaints related to gas well drilling. Quickly go over some of the health risks, but the thing to understand here is that it's not fully understood. There's a lot of research that's ongoing. There's a lot of studies being done, but it's not fully understood. That's the take-home message. There is an EPA study being done that is going to be released in draft form at the end of this year that looks at the impacts that horizontal drilling and high-volume hydraulic fracturing has on drinking water. A lot of other research being done, a lot of other issues out there. The biggest thing is New York State has to allocate the resources. If they're going to let this industry into the state, they had better open their wallets and they had better provide DEC with adequate staffing so they can be out there and enforce the regulations that are in that environmental impact statement. Because you could have all the regulations in the world in there, but if they don't have the staff and the ability to enforce those regulations, then they're no good. We have to respond to problems when they occur. The problems are going to occur. I mean, accidents happen. It doesn't matter if it's gas well drilling, wind turbines, whatever it is, accidents are going to happen. Everything has an imposed risk. What we want to do is minimize those problems. And when they do occur, address them quickly, swiftly, and also resolve them quickly and have some recourse to, if someone's water well does get contaminated, let's help that person out. I do want to mention that the issue in Poland, where there was 3 homes that were contaminated with natural gas because of that problem with the casing. That well drilling outfit took responsibility and drilled new water wells for those residents, installed treatment, and that's what we need to see when this moves forward, if this moves forward. And actually, we'd really like to see all of the regulations that are in the horizontal well drilling environmental impact statement imposed on vertical drilling. It would make things safer. Thank you, Chairman Gould.
Thank you very much.